Hello and welcome. My name is Grace Riley, and we're at the Post-Roe America Conference for the Institute for Faith and Freedom. I am joined by Dr. Jason Edwards. Dr. Edwards serves as a professor of history at Grove City College. He's a fellow for the Institute for Faith and Freedom, and he also has coached the Grove City debate team through 32 now national championships.
Yeah, we've been really blessed with that. So we actually picked up a couple this year. So over the past decade plus, we've been really blessed with the success.
Yeah, and it's so nice to have you joining me. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So his talk that he delivered here at the conference was on the unparalleled lives of G.K. Chesterton and Margaret Sanger. So today we're just going to break down a bit of that for all of you listening who weren't able to hear his speech. So just to start, can you just tell me a bit about who both of these people were?
Sure. So they do have some parallels with one another. And Dr. Kingor, when he asked me to speak at the conference, said, would you be willing to look into and talk about Margaret Sanger, so that we know the build-up towards Roe. And I said, well, sure, but that's kind of a depressing topic, talking about her, so how about I talk as well about G.K. Chesterton? So they're primarily here as unparalleled as can be, though they were contemporaries in time. I don't know that they interacted really directly with one another, but she was, of course, ultimately the founder of Planned Parenthood, and was an advocate for birth control, and as I talk about in the speech, is really adamant for eugenics. And my talk revolved an awful lot about eugenics, and I wanted to talk about G.K. Chesterton because he really was one of the only public intellectuals at the time who was speaking out against eugenics. We do thankfully look back at eugenics as a dark part of our American history, Western civilization history, but the fact of the matter is it was incredibly popular in the mainstream of America at the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah, and I think now what's interesting is the amount of people who don't know about Margaret Sanger or don't know the roots of Planned Parenthood, because obviously that's not something that they would promote. And though they do give awards, though, such as the Margaret Sanger Award, so they are proud of their founding, but a lot of people seem to not really know the history. So how did she start Planned Parenthood, and what was her goal and motivation in doing so?
Right, well, she starts out as a nurse, and she has several stories as to why she's concerned about women and getting them information about birth control. And it kind of starts out for her as a free speech issue, but it quickly transforms into her advocacy for birth control, and again, as I argue, ultimately eugenics. A lot of people try to protect her name. There is some. The Planned Parenthood, one of their branches in New York City, has just taken her name off of their building because of their admitting that she's the negative impact that Planned Parenthood or her history has had on particularly people of color. But most people still try to say she wasn't truly for eugenics, and she was. And so she really advocates, as I make the case, that yes, she is concerned about, in a certain sense, women's rights and trying to have them take control of their reproductive choices. She frequently is not supporting abortion as much as she does. It's Alan Guttmacher, who's the second head of Planned Parenthood, that really pushes them into the advocacy for abortion. She's advocating for birth control, so that there's no need for the abortions. But ultimately, she really comes off as pretty obviously kind of anti-child, in that she wants, yes, women to have these reproductive rights, but if you look into her writings, she has rather frequent and bizarre, it's a little, to be honest with you, tawdry to talk about, but she is this bohemian spirit that she goes through a couple of marriages. Her second one is officially from the start an open marriage. She has all kinds of sexual relations in America, in England, and all around. And she seems to think that this free sex lifestyle is a way to advance evolution as well. And so if you want to live that lifestyle, then birth control is something that she wants to have, so that children are not resulting from that. And then so it's the women's rights, the bohemian lifestyle, and then eugenics. She just comes out and says, we want more children from the fit and less from the unfit. And her only real divergence at times from the straightforward eugenics is that most eugenists really push for, again, lots of children from the fit, and they just try to stop the quote-unquote unfit from having them. And she seems to just not want children, period. So she frequently is saying, well, really not for the fit or the unfit, but that's how she's approaching it.
Yeah, and looking now, I mean, sadly, for people of color, they're still the most impacted by abortion,
Absolutely.
by Planned Parenthood, so that hasn't changed. And looking back at the roots, that's particularly concerning, of obviously her motivations when she was advocating for these things. And it also is true as well, certainly, that there are parallels with the sexual revolution and what she was kind of living out in her life and the lifestyle that she was promoting. That obviously ushered in a lot of this birth control and abortion, and a lot of what we're seeing now. I mean, that's gone way farther probably than people ever thought that it would.
Oh, absolutely, and it's disturbing on the racial issue. I mean, she does have a Negro project, and she speaks to the Ku Klux Klan, and has a particularly disturbing quote where she's saying, well, we don't want it, we need to make sure we get to the ministers, lest they know or think that we're trying to eliminate the African American race. There are people, and it's a difficult quote. You can read it, and it's obviously about as heinous as it can sound. There's ways that people say, oh, she's saying, oh, that's we don't want to be accused of that. But at the time and how she acts and what she did, again, even people now in Planned Parenthood are increasingly saying, like, oh no, this is somebody that our history is a dark one in this category.
Yeah, and I think the important thing too is that clearly the roots of Planned Parenthood are a lot deeper than maybe what some may think on the surface of, well, it's just about promoting feminism or women's rights. It is deeper than that, as you explained, and there's more to it than that at its core. And looking at this, what was Chesterton's role, and what are some of his sort of advocacies against this, as you noted?
Well, yeah, as I said, Chesterton, right from the very beginning, he has a book that he comes out with in the early 20th century called Eugenics and Other Evils. And it really remains poignant for us today in a lot of ways, because he's talking about this scientific dictatorship, really, of society, which I don't have to go back, too many years. Like, we've recently had some experience with this as well, and how I try to approach it with Chesterton is introduce he's really setting up that our faith in the West has become materialism, and that is setting up laws, and we have an established church, and it's this established church of materialism, and with that materialism, we're trying to control things and control human evolution, and so that's where these eugenic mindsets have come from, and so the United States, to our shame, many of the states, many still do, to be honest, had forced sterilization laws, and so we against their will and frankly, to be honest, sometimes against their knowledge, sterilized tens of thousands of Americans because they were deemed by the scientists, by the elite, as these are unfit. We don't want them having children, and so we're going to sterilize them against their will. Now, the whole eugenics movement, it began in England, it crosses the pond and comes to the United States, where we endorse it enthusiastically. It's challenged in the U.S. Supreme Court, but in 1927, in the infamous Buck v. Bell decision, the Supreme Court said no, forced sterilization is not unconstitutional, and we've never overturned that decision, to my knowledge. And then it hops again across the pond to Germany and is embraced so much by the Nazis that, as the story goes, after World War II, and we see the horrors of the Holocaust, then we stepped back from eugenics. The forced sterilization dropped a lot, but arguably still continued to the 70s, and we stopped using eugenics as a term. But a major point of my talk is that it really doesn't. Be careful with this history. Lots of people want to tell you that, oh, well, it went away, like we figured this out after World War II. And it's like, well, we didn't figure this out after World War II. And this is when, like, Planned Parenthood really, and ultimately we end up with mass abortions. That's part of a eugenic mindset. And my concern is that, we could end up in this place again. Hopefully we would be resistant to this state-supported and directed dictatorship, but we're facing, and they even are now calling it a new eugenics, that this may come to us through the market and through choice, that you're going to start to have like designer babies, and that's the direction that we're going, and so you're going to have a new, so I think that I like using Chesterton because he's saying that, look, this is the root of this is this materialistic faith. And so if we don't get rid of this materialistic faith, you're going to keep ending up in this awful, dangerous spot. So we need to go back to the true faith, and that's really the contrast that you have between those two.
And you're exactly right that I think one of the ways that we're seeing this now is in the irony of using technology to, instead of help save babies, now it's people are using it to decide, well, I actually don't want this baby. And what I mean by that is now there's genetic diagnosis available.
That's right.
Where you can tell if a child has certain disabilities or autism or things like that, or Down syndrome that's being diagnosed in the womb. And from that, doctors are encouraging patients to abort these babies, which is eugenics and is horrible. And that's something, can you speak to that and that which we're seeing now becoming a lot more prevalent?
Yeah, well, a lot of, again, the association with the Nazis made people move away from eugenics, or at least using the term for a while. Another element is that a lot of it was good, quote unquote, science. A lot of it we look back on and say, oh, well, that was bad science. They didn't quite understand obviously the genetic codes and so forth as well as we did, or as well as we do now. But the problem is that mindset. And so that's what we need to get away from. And I'm hoping, that the talk would contribute to that, but that people would start realizing that, wait a minute, it's like eugenics wasn't wrong because their science was wrong. Like, just because our science and our technology is better, that doesn't make it okay, all of a sudden to eliminate groups of people or eliminate individual babies. That's stepping into the wrong, that's just wrong. And so we have to return to, so that's, I think, is the core, is that, look, just because, there's science and sometimes was bad, and that contributed to making it wrong, but it's the philosophy that made it wrong. It was wrong because you're forcing this onto people, but just because people do it voluntarily, that doesn't make it right either. No. And so, there's needs to be a real change. And so I would hope with the, people recognizing a lot of this racist core and background to it, or that it lends itself extremely well to racism, that people would say, wait a minute, we need to reconsider this and go back on this. I talk in the speech as well. I talked about, like, where I'd like a new feminism that whether it was birth control or abortion, Sanger and others, they clearly always approached it as, to my mind, I don't understand how it's not recognized as being anti-woman. Because the problem that they saw was that, well, women are fertile. And so if we could just eliminate this fertility, then we'll create this world that we want. Well, that's inherently, to me, anti-woman. And then especially looking at the world, what children are aborted more. Women are in much greater numbers aborted than male babies. And so I would like feminists to, and I think that there's even some connection with this anti-woman element that's contributing to other parts of our cultural moment that are, I ask, like, why is it okay that we eliminate women's sports? Like, we've made so much progress so that women could have sports and be celebrated for their accomplishments, and now we have people falling all over themselves to say, well, we're going to eliminate women's sports, which is what you're doing if you allow biological males to compete against biological females in sports competitions. And and why is it okay to put on girl face and have a minstrel show? Like, we know that's not okay for blackface, and that this is something that we shouldn't do. But now we're celebrating this in drag shows and of all things at elementary schools and so forth. And so I think there's a lot of connection, but ultimately I think it's coming down to, as Whittaker Chambers would say, is it God or man? And that's what I think Chesterton is saying. Are you going to have God or this material atheistic understanding of the world? And until we turn back to God, we're going to have the horrors of eugenics, the horrors of abortion, in a host of different ways.
Yeah, and that is really, really well said. And it is true that I think a lot of leftist ideology is being ushered in under the guise of being called feminism and in benefit of women. And clearly all the things that you mentioned are having the opposite effect. And even with abortion and birth control, there are so many negative effects that impact women from that. So all of these things really need to be looked at. And I think on the scientific note, that ushers in a lot of accountability that's needed now more than ever as we have developing technology to make sure we're using it in ethical ways. Science and technology, making sure that we're using that in ethical ways, and that just because we can do something does not mean it's moral or that we should.
No, that's absolutely true. And so I appreciate you, Grace, and the IFF for giving me an opportunity to speak about those things, and that your dedication to bringing these things to light individually and with the college and with IFF. And so I appreciate you having me here.
Thank you so much. And the same to you. Thank you for standing up and doing the research and bringing these facts and this message to people, because it is really important. So thank you to you as well for your role. And thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
For more information on the Institute for Faith and Freedom, visit faithandfreedom.com.